First of all, I'd like to thank the WPC and Intel for organizing this conference. Thank you very much. Comrades, the US and its NATO allies have exploited the current situation in the region via the proxy wars in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen to justify their dangerous and adventurous plans. The recent visit to Saudi Arabia and Israel by Donald Trump clearly exposed imperialism's sickening intent to impose its hegemony once again. The sale of hundreds of billions in armaments to the medieval regime in Saudi Arabia, and then declaring unequivocally the support for the reactionary and the warmongering Israeli government of Benjamin Netanyahu means that the prospect of further wars are on the horizon. In his visit to Saudi Arabia, Donald Trump also endorsed the formation of a permanent Islamic military alliance linked to NATO under the leadership of Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt. This military alliance that incorporates 29 Islamic countries is led by a recently retired Pakistani general, Rahil Sharif, and is clearly focusing its attention on Iran and Shia Muslim countries in the region. Trump's statement in Saudi Arabia and in Israel threatening Iran were clearly designed to demonstrate the change in the tact of US military strategy in the region. Since the beginning of the global economic crisis of capitalism in 2008, we have seen imperialist powers intensify their aggression in a bid to maintain hegemony. This is manifested in the intervention of the US, NATO, and the EU in the internal affairs of other states, the militarization of zones of interests, including the Pacific Rim, Indian Ocean, and Mediterranean Sea, the destabilization of countries and the regions, the violent provocation of sectarian conflict, and the intention of waging a war. Our opposition to NATO stems from the fact that this imperialist organization not only is an instrument of war and the military enslavement of nations since its foundation in 1949, but also the fact that it is gaining monstrous dimensions and allocates itself ever-widening mandates. It is a fact that in the past 2 decades, at every NATO summit, decisions have been taken to expand and strengthen the mandate of this organization. NATO is now threatening every country and nation across the globe because it claims a dangerous out-of-area global military role that is realized through the proliferation of partnership with non-member countries, notably in the developing world. Conflict in the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and North Africa, in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, and Ukraine, which have already brought death and misery to millions, are in danger of escalating into devastating regional wars, which brings potential of generalized global conflagration ever closer. ADPSD Iran stands for peace and progress. We regard it as fundamental that while recognizing that the US-led imperialists would rather see the destruction of humanity than progress towards a more equal, just and democratic world. We demonstrate that violence and war are not inevitable, that they are political choices, and that peace campaigners globally are able to challenge and defeat such choices. The ADSP Iran recognizes the imperative of being part of an anti-imperialist peace movement and is building and strengthening the peace movement in Iran and is educating it about sources of war and militarism. We are aware that we need to develop awareness in the popular movement for progressive change in Iran, but the true nature of NATO that motives of its backers and the outcomes of its actions. We consider ourselves an integral part of the World Peace Council because we recognize and support its mission to build popular consciousness globally about the importance of opposition to war in supporting peace, saying to NATO as well as other aggressive pacts and alliances of the US, EU and their allies, and ultimately for dissolution of NATO itself. In fact, it is a fact recognized by all campaigning for peace and disarmament that if the current situation continues, the Middle East can only look forward to a future of further wars, destabilization and imperialist domination. Wars in Syria, Iraq, Yemen and Afghanistan, as well as political crises in Iran, Lebanon, Egypt and Palestine have already scarred the face of our region and fomented a dangerous situation. The US and EU leaders are openly debating the practicalities of altering the existing borders of Syria and Iraq and creating new statelets in their place, based along the ethnic and sectarian fault lines. The new Middle East plan is speedily taking shape. ADSP Iran has repeatedly stated that without a united international mass campaign for the peaceful resolution of existing conflicts in the region, the current tragedies will only continue to grow. The only victim will be the working people and the poor who have no other option but to take increasingly desperate measures just in order to survive. Nearly finished now. ADSP Iran believes that in spite of globally peddled Islamophobic propaganda and the real or perceived threat of Islamic terrorism, the US strategies are unlikely to consider the ideology of political Islam to be an existential strategic threat to their interest. In fact, the pronouncement of Donald Trump during his visit to Saudi Arabia and Israel have shown that on the contrary, intrinsic economic links fuse imperialist objectives with those of political Islam. The US policy shift in the Middle East simultaneously counters and supports the regional contradiction that exists in relation to each key player. A new wilderness of mirrors. The US is using its power to exploit internal unrest and contradiction by means of more sophisticated and carefully calibrated carrot and stick approach in its supposed diplomacy. Thank you.